Countdown by Ben Mikaelsen. Chapter 5. In Montana, Elliot Schroeder's life shifted suddenly into high gear. At the ranch, the phone rang non-stop, even after midnight. Finally, Elliot's dad jerked the cord from the wall. "This is a ranch, not a zoo." Dalton grumped. At breakfast, Elliot's mom, Angie, commented, "This is the first time I'd ever fed an astronaut." "No, it isn't, Mom." Elliot grinned. "Before, you just didn't know I'd be going to space." During the next 3 days, NASA arranged television interviews and a big parade in Big Timber. The last day before leaving, Elliot saddled his horse, Cooper, and rode one last time up into the foothills. When he neared the tree line, he stared up into the snowy canopy of trees. His breath showed in the crisp fall air. "Good luck, old Crowleg," he whispered. Then reluctantly, he returned home. Back at the ranch, Elliot pulled off the saddle and rubbed down his horse. He patted Cooper. "Goodbye, old boy. I won't be seeing you for a bit." Cooper nuzzled Elliot's cheek. After final packing and lunch, it was time to leave. Elliot's parents rode with him in the pickup. His father whistled low as they pulled into the airport. "Look at that!" He pointed at a private jet parked on the ramp, not far from the Cessna 150 Elliot used for lessons. Across the jet's shiny white tail were the letters NASA. "This is awesome," Elliot said breathlessly. "That thing is huge compared to the Cessna 150. Can you believe it? I'm riding in a private jet." Dalton poked Elliot. "Get used to it, hot dog." Under a deep blue Montana sky, with hundreds of townspeople gathered, Elliot said goodbyes. The high school band was there, playing "America the Beautiful." Elliot hugged his parents hard. Finally, Angie and Dalton let him go. Concern showed strongly in their eyes. "Remember where home is," Dalton said. Elliot nodded and headed for the plane. The chief pilot welcomed him with a handshake. "I understand you're headed for space, young man." Elliot squared his shoulders. "I hope so, sir. We'll be flying you to Houston. If you need anything, let us know. Feel free to visit the cockpit." "You don't mind?" "We'd be honored," said the pilot, showing Elliot to his seat behind Miss Lopez and Mr. Boslow. "This is unreal," Elliot whispered aloud as he settled into the large cushioned seat. He pushed his face against the round window and waved at the cheering crowd. After takeoff, Elliot slumped back. Until now, adrenaline had kept him pumped and awake, floating emotionally outside himself. But now, climbing up through the clouds, he had time to really think. Fear settled in and gnawed at his gut like a ranch rat chewing on a sack of grain. He was actually doing it. He was on his way to the Johnson Space Center to be an astronaut. The jet's flight path shadowed the east side of the Rockies, south toward Texas. Over southern Colorado, Elliot stood and worked his way forward to the cockpit. The pilots greeted him. "This is the business end of the Gulfstream jet," the co-pilot said. Elliot stared at the instruments, radios, switches, and lights. This sure wasn't a Cessna 150. "Want a flyer?" asked the co-pilot. Elliot grinned. "I couldn't fly this thing. All I've ever flown is a Cessna 150. The co-pilot slid from his right seat. "This crate really isn't much different." Cautiously, Elliot sat and gripped the yoke. With coaxing, he pulled back and pushed forward. Then he steered left and right. The big jet climbed, dived, and banked. "Hey!" yelled Mr. Boslow from the back. "You guys want my lunch on the floor?" Elliot grinned and steered more gently. "What is this instrument?" he asked, seeing one he didn't recognize. For an hour, the pilots explained the cockpit. Elliot kept a close eye on the rate of climb indicator, the airspeed indicator, the altimeter, the turn and bank indicator, and the compass. He even helped change radio frequencies. "We'll soon be starting our descent into Ellington Field," said the standing pilot. "Unless you plan on landing this bucket of bolts, you better let us take over." Elliot slid from the seat. "Thanks," he said. "Thanks a million." "You'll make a fine astronaut," said the head pilot. Elliot nodded and returned to his seat. He hoped the pilots were right. He still couldn't picture himself as an astronaut. His insides felt like a balloon getting ready to burst. What would it feel like to be weightless? Reluctantly, Vincent Oldtome helped circle the great lion, Aulrani. As the boys moved slowly closer, the boy Lebu began a low, mesmerizing chant. The others joined in until it sounded like a swarm of bees. The great Aulrani spun, raking the ground with his claws and exploding forward with short, vicious charges. His powerful muscles bulged and ripped under his shiny yellow coat. The chant droned louder. Aulrani's eyes glinted. His rumbling growls sounded like thunder from the earth. Without warning, Lebu raced in from behind and flung his spear. The thin shaft pierced Aulrani's side. The lion's thundering roar stopped the circle of boys. Aulrani spun, biting at the spear and breaking the wood shaft. Half the spear still stuck into his body. The boys closed it again as Lebu ran quickly outside the circle to hide. Aulrani would charge Lebu now if he saw him. The boy Tinga ran in next and speared the great Aulrani's neck. Again Aulrani roared, biting at the spear. Then he chased Tinga. Immediately, Mosipa and Corio closed from the side and threw their spears hard. Aulrani stumbled and pawed at the ground. Life from his body left long red smears on the dried and cracked ground. The boys' chants rose like the howling of the wind. The chilling sound mixed with the lion's hollow growls. Aulrani collapsed. Mosipa bent low and crept in, grabbing the big lion's tail to show his courage. He would get to keep the tail. Aulrani grunted and swatted weakly. Sapporo ran forward and buried his spear deep in the cat's heaving chest. This brought a last gurgling roar, and then Aulrani lay still except for the twitching of his paws. The boys cheered wildly, all except Vincent. Lebu saw Vincent still holding his spear and ran up to him. "You are more than a coward," he screamed. "You are goat dung. You are an earless dog." Lebu spit in Vincent's face and grabbed his spear. He ran over and threw the spear into the lifeless Aulrani. "Vincent is a coward," Lebu shouted again. "But his spear is not." Vincent wiped his face and watched quietly as the boys worked, cutting off claws, ears, and tails to prove their bravery. Overhead, the vultures circled. When the boys started back, Vincent walked over and pulled his spear slowly from the butchered body. The blade glowed red with blood. There was no grasses to wipe it clean. The ground was too hard. At that moment, Vincent understood one reason why the great Moss Island was breathing each day one less breath. This death came not from the anger of Enge. This death came not from their enemies, the Kikuyu or the Kisi, nor had it been brought by the white man. This death had been brought only by the Masai, and this death would bring life only to the vultures and the hyenas. End of chapter 5.